That music was brought to you and played by Steve Miller, my brother-in-law, and produced by Lainey Miller, my niece.
In this episode of Outside Insights, we're thrilled to have Mark Olazagasti as our guest. He's had a remarkable career in IT. He recently retired as managing partner and founding member of Info Solutions. He'll talk more about what Info Solutions does, but it's infrastructure consulting, managed services, and he played a pivotal role in building that company and then serving customers really in the Mid-Atlantic. If you're not sure what the Mid-Atlantic is, that's Delaware, Maryland, New Jersey, and Pennsylvania. Mark, you're a first-generation entrepreneur and lifelong Delawarean. Do I have that right?
That is accurate.
I think he's very deeply committed to the local part of Delaware, and I think you'll hear that both in how he gives back with his time to entrepreneurs, how he's involved in various boards and committees, and maybe as he talks a little about his not-for-profit, which he founded in 2015, Your Money 101. Mark, we've been talking about getting you on the show for a long time. I'm really thrilled to have you here.
My pleasure to be here. Thank you.
Appreciate it. So, really big, tough first question. Do you remember how we met?
I thought you were going to go with favorite color, but I'm assuming
orange.
that
It's very obviously orange, isn't it?
It is orange. I'm blue. So,
all right. I'm colorblind. So I'm not. Go ahead.
No. So, you're going to have to correct me, but so our relationship developed, I know for a fact, with the Newcastle County Chamber when we joined the Emerging Enterprise Center as a basically startup company. Now we had plenty years of industry experience, but we were new to starting a company. So Carmen Fasciola was my first mentor when we joined, and I was so there's three main partners, and I was the first one to jump. And Carmen was my mentor. And that usually, I think, lasted about a year. And then you became my mentor, if you remember.
I do remember that.
Yeah. So that was where the relationship developed to where it is today. But I don't recall the first meeting. Do you?
This was really for you and I to have a little fun and kind of loosen ourselves up for the dialogue. Obviously you worked in an entrepreneurial business before that in Info Systems, good old Mark Stellini and company. And I was thinking that we may have met, I know you're on that management team, and I hung around a lot like teaching Dale Carnegie to that group. So I wasn't sure if you were in that classroom, but I think our first discussion was talking about marketing and talking about Info Solutions and maybe getting together in my old conference room. But I like that story. And obviously you went on to give back to that chamber and a whole host of other things and became an anchor customer and stayed because it was the right thing. And so there's a neat story there. So is that 10 or 15 years ago, or am I even dating myself even further?
We just turned 15 in February. So 2010, 2011, somewhere around there was probably when you became our mentor.
Isn't that interesting about starting a business during a downturn? That's where most of them are started, right? You got nothing else to do but to go up.
Yeah. So, it's funny you mentioned that because that was a challenge. So, what people don't realize is it's not your good looks that get you funding, right? It's your own personal credit, your own credit score. And I remember I went into PNC and all the partners had, good credit scores. And PNC at the time, hopefully I'm not going to get in trouble. They're not a sponsor. But at the time, they were known as a small business lender. Like they were the go-to people. Yeah. They declined us. And all we wanted was a line of credit to just have a buffer. And
do you remember why they declined?
Just because the Great Recession. We were in the midst of it.
Yeah.
And
it had less to do with you and more to do, I perceive, with that they weren't lending to anybody.
Correct.
Yeah.
And maybe they wanted our house for, to sign away our house type of thing. But I mean, quite frankly, even then, and I had just moved in. I probably had no equity, right? Because the market had turned upside down. So it was a challenge. And we ended up, Rich Rue, my business partner, had a relationship at WSFS, and that's where we ended up getting our line of credit. And, they extended us, and, we have that relationship going on to this day.
It may not be obvious to everybody, but you start a business. Why do you need a line of credit? Because reality is expenses creep in. You start to grow. Your customers pay you later than when you need cash.
Right.
It's about making things a little easier on the business, and it just helps you get between tough spots. And it's very common, no different than having a credit card at home, but you need it until you get that receivables coming in to pay it off. So all of us need it. That was a very interesting time because obviously I was in business a bit before that, but I can remember paying down a credit line and thinking that would satisfy the bank, and them saying, well, no, we're just going to thank you for paying it off, but we're going to freeze it too.
Yep.
So you paid it up, but you can't use it right now. And that was just the way it was at those times, which is always kind of interesting. Obviously, I announced that you've recently retired. What are you up to these days? How are you spending your time?
So my whole career, I've been a to-do list person. So that hasn't changed. I've transitioned, and I'll talk more about your Money 101. So I do anything related to personal finance. I'm quite a bit. I'm actually on the board of directors or board of trustees at Goldie Beacon College as vice chair, recently as chair. So, I keep busy that way, but to-do list, that's what I've been driven by. The neat thing about it is I get to pick and choose my to-dos more so, than before. Right. So I have less must-dos, which is, it's actually pretty liberating.
Want to do.
What's that?
More want to do. More things you want to do.
Correct.
To the average person listening, that sounds like a dreamy Saturday, right? To get a few hours to do what you want. But that's pretty cool. It's obviously earned. Now, you're still basically you retired from your day job, but you're still a shareholder in the firm, correct?
And I've helped out a little bit here and there. It might be 8 hours in a month type of thing, or anywhere from 0 to 16 hours in a month. It was a little bit more. I helped out more at year end to close out the year.
Sure.
Because that was
Mr.
our first,
Finance. Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah. So that but that's fine. But yeah, I'm
so how do those stories kind of all blend together? You've got a new to-do list. You've you accomplished what you wanted with the business. You have the not-for-profit. So are you going for it with the not-for-profit? Are you spending more time on that? And talk a bit about it.
Yeah. So it's neat how it evolved. I incorporated it in 2015, but I kind of started it oddly enough doing Q&As at Goldie Beacon for Pat Bueller. And it was mostly around business. So I would, just do a Q&A around starting a business and talking to her students. And, I developed a relationship with Pat, and just somehow the topic got onto what my passions were. And, I said, my passions for various reasons always been personal finance. And, I talked about wanting to get back to it. And it just kind of ended up being a little bit of a perfect storm where I just, kind of evolved into it, where I said, okay, well, how do I change the business presentations to personal finance presentations? And then it morphed into, what do I really want to do with the nonprofit? I love mentoring people. I like doing Q&As, lunch and learns, things like that, where, passing along knowledge. And, the interesting thing, the IT industry, I was the business end of it. I wasn't the technical end of it. So, I'd go into a meeting and I would listen, right? So, because, people would talk about the technology. And I enjoyed being able to help the client with the business aspect of the technology. But, I was kind of I wasn't teaching. I wasn't mentoring in that regard, right? On a day-to-day basis. And I I kind of gravitated towards that. So very early on, and actually right now, the tagline for Your Money 101 is advocate, educate, and mentor.
Okay.
The educate mentor piece I've been doing for years, and I'll continue doing that. And, I obviously do some education and mentoring for the fine folks at Placers.
We appreciate it. And the truth is, it's nice to be able to get your advice from somebody who is neutral.
Yeah, and my advice is based on life experience. I'm not selling product. I'm just, I won't tell anybody that I haven't, if I haven't experienced something, and been around for a while, so I've experienced a lot of different things, including the Great Recession. And ups and downs in the market, and just budgeting, and the importance of really understanding debt and things like that. So it evolved. The thing that is I've kind of focused on, especially in retirement, is like, well, what does the advocate piece mean?
Yeah, what does it mean?
Well, so for the longest time, it meant Goldie Beacom and trying to get them to have personal finances as a required course. As far as I was able to get was the influence, and you figure, board chair, I should be able to, wave a magic wand.
That's what I'm thinking. That should be easy, right?
Does not work that way. Doesn't work that way.
No.
But so I did have influence, and I said, well, what ended up happening was it ended up being an elective, and it's actually one of the most attended electives that the college offers, because I think students realize, hey, I have to learn this at some point in time. So once I kind of crossed that off my list, I said, okay, advocate, what can I do? So, I retired, had some extra time. I'm like, well, what does Delaware do as far as advocacy piece? And the thing that started driving me towards this was whenever I would talk to employees or people in the workforce already, the common theme I kept on hearing was, I wish I had learned this in blank. And blank was either high school, college, or before I was thousands of dollars in debt. Right. So I'm like, okay, well, I enjoy mentoring people that are in the workforce, but I'm like, how can I try and make a difference a little bit more upstream? So I started doing a little bit of research of what Delaware offers in their high schools, and ended up meeting several different people to come find out that it is not a required course. And I ended up connecting with the folks at the Center for Economic Education and Entrepreneurship at the University of Delaware. I connected with a gentleman at Next Gen Personal Finance. And the long story short is, I was like, well, it needs to be a requirement to graduate high school. And in my early understanding, I'm like, well, if that's going to happen, you need a legislative person that's passionate about it. And fortunately,
that would sponsor it, right?
It would sponsor it. And fortunately, Rep. Jeff Hilvosky in Sussex County is all over it. I mean, he is. I remember when I first got introduced to him, and someone said he's tirelessly working on it. And I was like, oh, yeah, tirelessly. What does that mean? Well, he is. He's very passionate about it. So anyway, this past June, it got introduced to the House. It's House Bill 203. It was presented to the Education Committee, and we had a pretty short runway, and it was voted out of the Education Committee with the caveat that we wouldn't go for this past June 30th, that we basically have until June 30th of 2024 to have this legislation passed. So what we're going to start doing is working with, people that are either want it tweaked or maybe even are opposed to it, and try and get something that's, a compromise and still meets the requirement that you need this in order to graduate, because it is a critical life skill.
So Jeff was working on this idea separate from your impetus, right?
Yes.
And then, okay.
Yeah.
And what will it create if it passes?
So it'll require a standalone semester of personal finance to be taught to every high school student in order to graduate.
That's extraordinary.
Right. And what we have to work out is, a standalone semester. So some high schools only have 1 year. Their course is a year rather than 2 semesters. So we need to just incorporate language that covers that, so it's clear.
So you have been busy, brother.
Yeah.
You've been very busy.
Yeah, I found the advocacy part of advocate, educate, and mentor. No doubt about that.
Well, and is it obvious that you can have a greater impact on more people through that if you succeed?
Yes.
All right. How about, do you think you'd have an opportunity to design the curriculum, or is that a whole different bag of snakes?
So when I first started doing my research, I was like, okay, are we starting? And I'm totally green, and I'm like, are we starting from scratch? What is it? If this is going to happen in my lifetime, is it starting from scratch? And I was pleased to find out that there is free curriculum out there. The Center for Economic Education and Entrepreneurship uses keys to financial success. They provide all the training to the teachers, and Next Gen Personal Finance is a national organization, and they provide free content. So the cool thing about it, Chris, is the infrastructure's there, right? You just need the will to be able to have the teachers learn, because the interesting thing is teachers are engaged when they're learning themselves, right? And then they have students that are engaged because the students realize that, like, I need this. This is like applicable to life.
Where will it be taught? Economics, business, finance?
Yeah, that's a great question. And to give you a kind of a flip answer, we don't care. We don't want to legislate that, right?
You can teach it in English if you need to,
exactly.
Right?
So in other words, we've met teachers that are math teachers that teach it. Economics is a common home for it. But the key is you just need a teacher or teachers that are passionate about it, and the rest kind of happens.
So I'll ask the question, any sense of how the other 49 states approach this topic?
Very similar. So there's 8 states that require it and have implemented it. And there are, I think, there's 17 states in all, maybe up to 21 in all, that are in some form of implementing. So I guess it would be 8 have implemented it and have it rolling. And then there's a bunch of states that, a handful of states, I guess maybe, 13, 14 states that have actually passed legislation that are in the process of implementing it, 2 or 3 or 4 years down the road.
So we're kind of middle of the pack as a
we're
state,
not the first state in this sense.
So it just a subtle kind of shift a little bit. Why has this topic been so taboo to learn, to talk about, to have education around? I mean, we're talking about, obviously, a lot of things going into Your Money 101, budgets, finance, debt, investments, all these things. But I know we've had a lot of really interesting lunchtime dialogues just about this. What makes this topic so hard, generally speaking?
So, think of sex education and money.
It's a great,
right? Those are two things that as families, we do a horrible job generally talking about. And finally, I mean, schools have been.
You just said it. We're done. You just covered it. We're all set, right? Yeah. I mean, I get your interesting perspective. And it's mainly because we didn't have formal education on those things.
Absolutely. So you also have teachers that have not been taught it maybe formally themselves.
That's a really interesting point. So it's just kind of shoved under the rug in a lot of cases.
Yes. It's almost like figure it out as you go.
Well, I think, part of this show and my blog is Outside Insights is really about helping people close gaps, personally or professionally. I think, Mark, a lot of times I had lots of employees, we've had lots of dialogues, not always know what's going on, of course, but it seems as if you stumble into these gaps, you make a mistake, you end up with some credit card debt or something, or you make a bad purchase or a bad decision. But I'm not really sure people know that there's ways to do this stuff right. Like, there are good choices around this to do this. And I just, maybe it comes back to not being taught, but it seems like people are learning this through their mistakes as opposed to get a good proactive game plan with any of it.
Yeah. And really, if you think about it, it's math, addition, subtraction, multiplication, division, and figuring out how to apply that to life, right? To personal finances. That's the foundation of it, right? It's not about crypto. It's not, it is about investing to some degree, but really you can't invest in yourself or in your future without understanding where you are financially, right? So it's more about, I call it keeping score rather than budgeting, because people kind of freak out when they hear the word budgeting because they think, depriving themselves. It's really about keeping score. I have income, I have expenses. At the end of the day, is it in the black or is it in the red? And making the right decisions on, major components of your life.
Mark, you would think that with the whole world being captured digitally now, we have watches that tell us all this stuff about our heart rates and did we sleep well and what's our energy level. You would think the keeping score would be right in line with everybody's desire to have more data on everything, unless you don't really like this score.
Exactly. And so, you can certainly do it, via an app. You can do it. I'm old school in the sense I do spreadsheet, and it's funny because I know plenty of millennials and Gen Zs that like my spreadsheet that I use. They tailor it to themselves. But
I'm going to tell my audience, his spreadsheet for keeping score is legendary, and I think I have like 11 family members that use that spreadsheet. So, in fact, if you don't mind, we'll put that spreadsheet in show notes. Is that okay? And then people could, if you'd like, could download it, and we can figure that out. If you're okay,
Chris, I'll give you an updated version. Probably, I'm sure you might have an older one. Yep.
Okay, that would be great.
Perfect.
So, anything more on your money 101, and just, because it might be interesting to actually talk about a little bit about personal finance and maybe trends you see or stories you'd like to share, or even suggestions. You said, you want to be in a mentoring spot. Thoughts in that area?
So an interesting thing when I started looking at the curriculum that is being taught by Next Gen Personal Finance and the folks at CEEE was when I looked at their outline, the word debt was not mentioned. Now, it was covered under credit and, obtaining credit and all that, but debt itself was not mentioned as a line item. And to me, debt is the most important thing that you need to understand, because it's going to, help you purchase a house, a car, your household needs, things like that. And understanding how to manage that debt, it ends up being critical. So, you hear a common term, your home is good debt, right? Your mortgage is good debt. Well, it can turn into bad debt pretty quickly if you overbuy. In other words, if you buy what you qualify for versus what you can afford. And the only way you can really figure out what you can afford is by understanding what's your income, what's your expenses. And, to your point, sometimes people don't want to know the answer. But the interesting thing is that even if you don't like the answer, you end up getting a sense of control. Because what I find is that people end up on a couple of different spectrums, right? They worry about stuff that they don't know. So understanding what the numbers are helps them say, oh, it's not as bad as I thought. Or it's as bad as I thought, but this is, at least I know what the number is, right? Now my worry is justified, right? So it's just interesting. And you're almost trying to navigate life, because money's not the most important thing, right? But it can buy you time, it can buy you a lot of different things, and it can also get you into trouble, right? So there is a tie to happiness in the sense that I've seen many people stressed, in debt, and it's impacting their life. It's impacting, the way they interact with their coworkers or productivity at work. And that's actually kind of how it all started when I started working with my own employees, understanding that they were stressed. And because it's a small company, I was able to say, hey, Bob, we don't have any Bob, so I can use Bob's name. But, Bob, what is there something bothering you? Because it just seems like, you perform at such a high level, but you seem a little distracted, and And again, it's not in a bad way, but I'm just like, what's wrong, right? Is, there's work and there's life, right? And how do you balance the two? And sometimes the life impacts the work. So,
well, we have very integrated lives, right? So if financial stressed or health is stressed, it's a whole circle it's all connected. You're right on.
So working with my own employees, I was like, hey, wait a minute, I like this. And that's, so between Pat Bueller, working with my own employees and figuring, okay, I started to figure out what I'm going to do when I retire. And the nonprofit came about because I'm like, well, I don't want to do it for profit because I don't want to sell product. I don't want it to be about money. And I also had business partners. So to me, the nonprofit just kind of like came out of, thinking about how do I make this happen? And, it kind of just all started coming together. And it was neat. It was neat watching the process develop and kind of enjoying the process with something fun that wasn't, career defining, such as starting a business.
So it sounds like it's nothing but joy.
Yes. Yeah, I really enjoy doing it.
Yeah.
So in retirement, I've tried to have a different mindset, and I try and ask myself almost on a daily basis, did I do something of value for myself? Because I'm a big believer in, you have to take the oxygen first before you can help the person next to you on the plane, right? So, did I do something of value for myself? Did I do value for someone I know? Did I do something of value for someone I don't know, or something? And, I kind of constantly ask myself that all the time.
So there's no surprise. I write down most days, am I being the person I want to be right now? So I think that's very interesting that we both have affirmations or statements of how we want to live our lives and give back, but also make a difference. It's really interesting to me about how this topic is taboo, and that people would, in some cases, rather live with the pain than talk about it. But it does sound like you're making a difference in that regard. And if you could just help a handful of people, then that's a strong beginning.
And it's funny because in retirement, the making a difference or adding value to the person I don't know has been the biggest challenge. It's almost like, what's that, random acts of kindness, right? That takes effort. But what I came to feel is that this legislation is going to help a lot of people I don't know.
Well, I also think, a conversation like this, if someone doesn't know, it's an interesting story to be for profit and then start a not-for-profit. Our careers are going to be defined by those kinds of lattice kinds of moves. I think it's great for people to hear that. Would you say, do you want to scale the not-for-profit? It might not even be the right question, but what would you say your goals are with your Money 101?
So the answer is still to be determined. And so I've thought on the big end, it's like SCORE, right? But for personal finance, where it's a volunteer organization, and there's a centralized operations, but so I thought
they're basically run by volunteers.
So I thought about it from that perspective. I just don't know if I want to go there and make that commitment, but that would be on the scale end, right? I'm doing what I'm doing at the individual level. And quite honest, I don't know if I want to have 5 clients, 10 clients, 15 clients that I work with, right? Do I want 10 placers or 5 placers, or do I just want 2 placers? So, in addition to doing the monthly recurring type of engagement that you and I are involved in, I do like 90 days where it's like, I introduce myself and I work with people and do one-on-ones, lunch and learn, things like that. And then after 90 days, the organization, the employer, donates to the nonprofit. What if they feel it's worth? If they value it as being $5 worth of my time and value, or $500, it doesn't matter. I leave it up to the employer to decide what they want to do.
So I think it's worth being doing the employer kind of reference here. Would you say 5 years, Mark? We've been doing this, or
COVID kind of
I don't want to
messes up timing with things, but I would say it's probably 5, 6, 7 years, even if I look back.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, so you have a couple of weird
Yep.
COVID years. But, Mark and I have been friends. We've talked business. We've talked about all aspects of life over time. And when he started Your Money 101, I think you came to me just to say, what do you think? And I was like, I'll buy right away. I think there is something to the fact that, I want to be a company and a leader that understands that there's a lot to life for my people. And, it starts with my fridge is bad. I don't have a nest egg saved, or my kids are a few years away from college. How do I think that through? Or 401k, or goes on and on with all the thinking that I would hear people say and not really be in a spot to help them because they didn't really want to talk to me about it. Right. They really don't want to. It's like sitting with mom or dad, right? It's kind of painful. But given a neutral place where Mark could provide education, have office hours, spend time with people that want to come on volunteer. I mean, I hear once a month that someone has less stress and has achieved a financial goal because of something that Your Money 101 has done. And, I just think it's a great program. It's why I wanted you to be here so more people could hear about it, and maybe it's just as important to hear somebody finding something they love and giving back and doing something great too. That's certainly a big part of this.
If it goes well, it's a win-win for everybody, right? I definitely get a satisfaction, enjoyment out of helping people. And that's kind of, and I grew up seeing people struggle with money. So, it's kind of like, I get a lot of enjoyment out of trying to help people, not just deal with the numbers, but the psychology of it, right? And that's hard, So you can learn all the things you should do, just like a diet, right?
Yes.
I know I shouldn't eat that dessert, but I do anyway. Well, I know I shouldn't spend that money, but I did anyway. And it's the same, very similar psychology part of it.
But it's about much more than discipline, It's not knowing sometimes. All right, so you get to be adjunct here. I know people are excited about Your Money 101, but it'd be foolish not to let you just address some. If someone is listening to this and they're not really sure how to start on this journey of personal finance, what steps do you recommend people take? That's the value. You want to impact people you don't know today? This is the opportunity to do so.
I don't care if it is a piece of paper, an online app, a spreadsheet, or rock and chisel. I don't care. It's understanding your income versus your expenses. That is the starting point. In IT, we call it a current state assessment. That's the foundation of it, right? It start today, right? Just put everything down on paper, see where you stand, and keep track of it, on a regular basis so that you can understand. The thing I hear over and over again is, I work hard. I spend a lot of time, work and effort, and, sometimes it takes away from family. That's how, taxing work can be sometimes. But at the end of the month, I don't have anything to show for it. Where did my money go? Well, the number, you need the answer to that question, right? And that is really the foundation of it. It's about keeping score. And then everything else kind of goes from there, right? Then you're like, okay, I have some money left over. What do I do with it? I build an emergency fund, because guess what? Life happens. And then after I build my emergency fund.
Any advice on what if I don't have an emergency fund, how do I think about that? Like I know if I got $10 left at the end of a paycheck, put it away, but what do I want to work up to?
The first dollar. I mean, again, we because if you hear a rule of thumb, it's like, oh, you want to have at least 3 to 6 months worth of expenses or income or whatever. Just start with the first dollar. Don't make it any more complex than what it is. Okay, at the end of the month, I have that $10 left over, right? Let's use that as an example. Okay, I want to put I don't have any emergency fund, so I want to put $5 of that into the emergency fund. And maybe it's a high yield savings account. Maybe, even ideally you automate it and you have it taken out of your paycheck into your emergency fund account, right? But say you just say, I have $10 in my hand. I'm going to put $5 in this account, and then $5 I'm going to do whatever. I have some fun. Don't deprive yourself, because the thing is it's not about the mocha latte, right? It isn't. If you enjoy the mocha latte, enjoy the mocha latte. Now, if you have to pay your electric bill or get your mocha latte, then you got to get your mocha latte, right? And you got to give up that, you got to pay your electric bill.
Yeah.
But if you make the right decisions around housing, transportation, debt, and out-of-pocket spending, which is a lot of things people don't really kind of do a good job tracking. If you really know those 4 things, and again, understanding the debt before you enter into it, that's the foundational stuff. That's what will get you or keep you out of trouble, so that you end up, being able to put, now I have $20, right? And then now, the next month I maybe have 10 again, but I know why. And then the month after that, maybe I have $40.
It seems like mindset slows people down, right? Oh, that seems like a lot of work to have to come up with my income and my expenses. Or, Mark, it's really frustrating. I only have $5 left. It's not even worth it. I might as well get another latte, But your point is to keep score and start making some progress.
Because what ends up happening, here's a really good example, right? Especially someone who is, just out of school, maybe has been working for 5 years, and, they have a wedding they have to go to. And guess what? I feel compelled to buy a gift that's $75. So I do it because, I feel bad if I don't spend the $75, right? Spend $50 or half of that. It is the thought that counts, right? So again, it's making those decisions. Yes. And I'll go way back to when I was a kid in high school. My mom struggled with debt, not because she liked to live a lavish life. It's because she did not understand when she charged her son's ice hockey equipment, $800 for the ice hockey equipment for a kid that really couldn't skate that well, and didn't pay it in full, that $800, right? Whether it's ice hockey equipment, furniture, or whatever, that $800 ended up costing her $1,200. And that's the math that people need to kind of understand. So, I can talk about this forever, but it's really important to understand debt and understand your current state, and realize that it will take more time and energy to get you out of debt than it will to be on a monthly basis to keep score. Because once you start it, then you keep it going, and it ends up taking you less time, each month.
It seems as if credit, available debt, is everywhere, and that there's always been this desire to keep up with your neighbor, the Joneses and Smiths and what have you. Yet we still get into debt, so it's just a tough one, because we want our kids to have hockey equipment. We want to send our kids to school in the fall with new shoes. It's a difficult thing, but it doesn't make sense to pay for it twice. That is for sure. You've often referred books to me that you thought were must reads on this. You want to talk about your favorites?
The index card is a great foundational book. Let's see. Olin and Pollock are the authors, and it is just a really good foundational book. I give it away all the time when I do, lunch and learns or Q&As. I either give away books or money. Let people make that choice. And that is a great foundational book that tells you really in basic terms, how to do personal finance, right? Kind of keeping it simple. The other book I like that is a great tag team is The Psychology of Money. And Roussel is the author. And the reason why I like that book is what I said earlier. It's right. The index card tells you what you should be doing. And The Psychology of Money helps you understand why you're not doing what you should be doing. Right?
Oh, that sounds like the one to start with. Why you're not there. Maybe do them both.
I would say it's a good AB or a BA. It doesn't matter. Both of them are very, very helpful because it's like, if you aren't figuring out why you're doing things, again, money's never been an issue for me as far as like saving and things like that. Mine's been food, right? So, I'll eat that dessert that I shouldn't be eating, right? So, that's my psychology of food, right? Very similar type of thing. The psychology of money just applies to money, and it talks about wealth and not being rich. You don't see wealth, right? And the other thing is you mentioned about, accumulating things. At the end of the day, it's stuff. And during, presentations that I'll do, I'll say, when do you ever see a U-Haul following a hearse? And the intent is to say you can't take it with you, order. Right? Well, I said that one time, and darn if some student didn't pull up a picture on the screen that showed a U-Haul after following a hearse. So I guess it does happen.
But I had this feeling that it was an old hearse converted to a passenger
my vote's
vehicle of some
but
kind. Well, kids are smart. There's a book,
yes.
Rich Dad, Poor Dad. Is it along the lines of some of that
yes.
thinking?
And the $1 million next door, maybe that's not quite titled, but again, it's that person you don't realize. So here's something for your listeners to do. Google Ronald Reed, janitor. Great story. Almost sounds like an urban legend, but the gentleman retired with $7 or $8 million, and he was a janitor. It is not about income. It's about managing your expenses. It's about managing your debt. It is not about income. Now, granted, someone who's living below the poverty line, yes, it's about income, right? I'm assuming that you have a living wage. So, so that's important. Yes. But it's not about, making $150,000 or $50,000. It's about what you do with that money and prioritizing.
If you like this show, Outside Insights has a lot of different guests. My book, Opposite the Crowd, is all about how to, I would say, maximize your living wage too. But, how to be an asset in business, how to manage your career, how to make decisions, how to lead, and things that can influence that. But it's all connected. It's all interconnected. What else are you thinking about from what you've been talking through?
So to keep on the personal finance theme, I find that mentor. Find whether it's myself or just again somebody who has lived it. I think the financial services industry has a bad name, maybe sometimes deservedly so, because they're so product focused. And I used to be in the industry. So real quick, funny story. I mean, my first job out of college was it was a car sales person that lasted 3 months. I hated it. I learned how not to manage people in those 3 months because that's how I was treated.
Yes.
Exactly.
How not to sell, how not to, not to do anything.
So it was very interesting, but I ended up getting into being, I was a stockbroker back in the day. I ended up selling penny stocks. Didn't know it. Wolf of Wall Street, that type of mentality. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, I learned a couple of very valuable lessons in that whole process. And I swore, like, one of the things I did is I had a big paycheck coming, $5,000 paycheck coming. I would make $5,000 in a summer, right? So this was like a big paycheck for 1 month. Myself and my fiance at the time, we were sitting on a beanbag chair watching TV on a milk crate. And, we both look at each other. We're like, knowing we got this money coming in. And I'm like, let's go buy some furniture. So we did 90 days same as cash, probably $2,500 worth of furniture. And within 3 weeks, the brokerage firm that I was working at went out of business. And guess what hadn't happened yet? I didn't get paid. Yes.
You hadn't been paid.
So everybody touches the stove, right? Just learn from it. And I learned from it. I have never bought anything again without having the money to pay for it. No problem charging things. Just make sure you pay off that bill in full.
Was the lesson the IOU? Was the lesson that it wasn't in hand yet? Because I mean, how many of us, I've got that raise coming, I got that end of the year bonus, goodness gracious, Chevy Chase puts a pool in before he gets his, Christmas vacation. He puts a pool in before he gets the check. So we all think this way. We all feel like that's like we're making our lives better. We're making it better.
I deserve it.
It's so hard, but
I deserve it. I've been I made 110 cold calls a day. Right. I have this big paycheck coming. I deserve it. Right. And you do, but just doing the right timing. Right. I should have had the money in hand. So it ended up being a very valuable lesson in life from a personal finance standpoint, but also from a business standpoint. Right. Because this, you high five each other because you've made this big sale. Well, that's just the beginning of the process. Right. You got to collect on that money, months down the road type of thing. Right. So
you have to deliver on it. You have to collect on it. You have to have a satisfied consumer.
Yeah, it is not
that simple. Yeah, of course.
So very, very valuable lesson learned at an early age. And I did not make that. So I can say that I've never had a credit card balance since I was 22, 23 years old. And I made $30,000 a year at the age of 30. So it wasn't about income. It was about managing my debt.
So people like the vulnerability of these stories. And I think you know this because I think you helped me with it. But talking about that, the bad recession of 2008, 2009, and 10, I was running a very successful company going into 07 and 08. We were $8-9 million in sales. And I had developed this formula. It's funny. For one thing, one aside, one of the things I think I've heard people admire is not everybody on this show has only had success. It's the lessons we've learned and the mistakes we've made that helped us maybe dig in and do things differently down the line. And this is my story. I was growing great. And I had this formula, Mark, where as long as my growth was like 7 times my debt, I was excited. So I was like using debt to grow this multiple. What I didn't realize along the lines of your commission is that 7 million in sales can become $1 million in 90 days during a pandemic, or I'm sorry, during a recession. So here I am. I have $1 million company with $1 million in debt. If you know me today, I won't even carry debt on a credit card for 2 cents. But it took me 11 years to pay that off. And, it's a great lesson learned. I don't have regrets. I think it was the best learned. I was flying high as a young 30-something who had never known failure. I'm, Inc. list guy, all this stuff. And then I ran into an important downturn. And I think all of this, maybe it puts new meaning to you got to have something aside for a rainy day. It's sort of the point of all this is be a little conservative with it. But those are real lessons.
Sometimes the hard way. Fortunately, we can now we can look back and share our lessons learned, and we're at least in that position to be able to do it rather than still dig ourselves out of our mistakes, right? So it's good stuff. I mean, we all make those mistakes, and the other thing is I think people are hard on themselves, right? So they may not like the number that when they do their income and expenses and all that stuff. But they automatically go to failure, right? I'm a failure. Well, no, you're not. In fact, you're actually being successful because you went through this step of trying to identify where you stand, right? So, failure, it's funny because I do a presentation based on FAST, which is FAST, and at each letter means something. And I give away, again, either money or book. And I do this from a business perspective or personal finance perspective. And failures, I hate to give away the answer, but failures, the first, that's what the F stands for. So, we tend to beat ourselves up when we fail rather than look at failure as an opportunity to, learn from it and fix it. And the other thing about failure, and I do want to talk about a couple books that I like that I've recently read, and that is the Subtle Art of Not Giving a Bleep by Mark Mason.
Great book.
Wonderful
book.
And then Yes,
the bleep is another word.
You would have to bleep out if I said it, but it's a great book. And just like the index card and the psychology of money, my kind of 1-2 is Mark Mason's book, and then The Power of Now, which is Eckhart Tolle. And The Power of Now, it's a pretty heavy duty spiritual book, but it talks about being present. It talks about being, in the moment, and not letting. And I go back to failure. Is failure we beat ourselves up about the past, which isn't good, right? And sometimes failure impacts because we're always, worried about the future rather than trying to enjoy, the moment and being in the moment and enjoying the process. And it's a lot harder to do than say, but that's what I've tried to do just through those 2 books.
Great recommendations. And I agree with you. Always daydreaming about the future or reflecting on yesterday versus being here right now. That's a great recommendation. Other things you'd like to share?
Yeah, so
laid out a lot.
So we all have our story, and I just kind of want to share a little bit more, personal story, in that because I think sometimes people will say, I'm a white male, that, they assume that, I haven't experienced certain things. Right. And there's certainly true to that. And I would be lying if I, didn't leverage being a white male in the 80s and 90s. Right. Because, I saw my.
You're talking about.
Yeah,
white,
exactly.
You're talking about white privilege.
And so, because I saw my mom.
Yep.
So I remember being a kid going to grocery store, and this is kind of also stayed with me throughout the years is, going to grocery store, my mom would be stressed sometimes more often than not, putting stuff back, she's doing her little adding on this plastic thing and sometimes just worrying about, having to buy that one thing too many. Right. And there's sometimes where she was more stressed than others. And it wasn't until later I understood that we were on food stamps and, and she was ashamed. Okay. So, that was something that was humbling. But then it also made me appreciate the importance of the social safety net that we do have. And, my mom worked at times 3 jobs, but, she had a high school education. I saw her being treated as a second-class citizen. And I think this is what kind of has propelled me to want to help people. I saw it as a kid.
You saw it as a kid?
It was sad.
Oh, shit.
Especially looking back because she was a good person. And
so you knew it was wrong.
So, I find myself kind of fighting for the underdog. And even I'll share another story that goes back to, so my dad was, his family was from Puerto Rico. He was actually born in New York. And we moved into a white middle class, low to middle class neighborhood in Newcastle. And I was 5 years old, 6 years old, something like that. And there was actually a boy that was probably 8 or 9. And he would walk by me and spit on the ground and call me some derogatory names that you would use for someone who was Puerto Rican or Spanish. And I didn't know it. I didn't understand it as a kid, right? I'm like, well, what's this kid picking on me for? But, 2 things that really,
you just knew he was picking on you.
As you get older, you understand kind of what's going on. But the thing that stuck with me that I started to realize is, and this is where the white male kind of took over is, so I saw firsthand right there, prejudice, right? Racism, whatever you want to call it. But It never happened to me again. Why? Why? Because nobody knows what to make of my last name, right? They think it's Italian or Polish or whatever, right? So I never had anybody from that moment on.
I don't know. That's simple.
Yeah.
It's really hard to tell.
I don't look like the stereotypical, so I never had that issue. So, I mean, again, to try and have to, it was a good learning experience to have to go through it. And I can only imagine what the dinner table was for this kid and what was said at the dinner table, right? Because, the kid wasn't born.
It was probably reinforced.
Exactly. Yeah.
Learn behavior,
So
right?
I
Learn
guess what I'm
behavior.
getting at is there's things that happen to you early on in life, right? What's that one famous thing, the book about, everything you learn in kindergarten, right? Well, there's truth to that, right? How to treat
Yes.
people and all that stuff. So rather than, look at things from a negative perspective, just always try and look at the past. If you're going to look at the past, and how can you learn from it? How can you become a better person? How can you not treat somebody like that? Or, again, try and help that single mother that's, having struggling, raising a kid, that type of thing. So again, experiences can propel you to do hopefully good things.
I'm really appreciative of you sharing that. And again, there's that thought that you just fell out of tree the way you are, and of course not. We experience life and that influences who we become. And I think it's a great story. And I mean, I think we all should talk more about those things. It's healthy, right? To be able to understand, because then it explains why you're doing what you're doing and wanting to help that single parent get a leg up.
Tell them don't buy their hockey, don't charge hockey equipment for a kid who's never going to, never going to be a great skater.
All those times I wanted those Nike shoes or those Levi's, and I saw that look that you had of your mom on my mom's face, not understanding that look, maybe until you become that parent and you're faced with that same thing. It's interesting. I think you may have already answered this question, but I like to ask this one. What advice would you have for your 21-year-old self? I'm not sure if you were 21 when you ordered the furniture or not, so it may not be a loaded question. But
it's funny you asked that, because when I was 21, 20 years old, I would commonly say to myself, when I'm 43, I won't remember this day. Because I would say that to myself.
You would say that?
Yeah, when I'm 43. Yeah, and the thing is
grown up.
And what I was telling myself is, the problem I'm having right now is pretty minor, and I'll forget about it. And again, it may have been, something with school or a girl or whatever, right? And not to minimize those problems, right? Because they're real, right? But I tried to get out of the, things will be better, right? And quite frankly, when I was 43, I kind of didn't remember a lot of the things that, I used to worry about when I was 20, 21. Although I did remember buying furniture that I didn't have the money for yet. So, there are some things you do remember, but a lot of the stuff that we have going on in here gets in the way because we're worried about, we're going down a rabbit hole about worrying about something. I've always been a future thinker. So I would, again, tell my 21-year-old self, one, it ends up pretty good. And two, don't sweat the small stuff, and try and be in the moment. Enjoy the process, right? Enjoy the process as much as you can. And it is definitely hard to do in your 20s and 30s because you're so much trying to find yourself, accumulate things, find your position, your value, and all that stuff. And it's hard, but try as best you can to enjoy the process as you go. My daughter danced professional ballet. She'd been dancing since she was 5 years old. And she got older and was having more and more major parts. I would tell her, Andrea, enjoy the moment, enjoy the moment on the stage with the crowd and all that stuff. Cause I knew that it won't last forever. Right. But then I was like, well, I got to live that, right? I'm telling my daughter to enjoy the moment. I have to live that too. So that's what I've tried to do. Yeah.
You've put that on a t-shirt yet? You might need to. I think it's Seneca that says events are not good or bad. We make them so. They're not good or bad. It's what we attach to them. So, Mark, if someone were interested in things that we've covered, ways to connect with your Money 101, how do they learn more? If they're a placers and want to get their 50 people, some mentoring in this space.
Email me.
What do
That's
they
probably
do?
one of the best ways. They can even text me. I don't care. I give my number out, but it's MOLAZ @YM. That's Yellow Mary 101.org.
All right, Mark. And again, we'll have show notes where we could put emails and maybe that budget template and those things. Mark, I appreciate you being vulnerable and sharing your story. I think it serves so many purposes, and I'm very proud to know you and know that the path that you're on. And I look forward to hearing more about the advocacy and seeing that get into the Delaware schools. I think it seems like the right thing. And, I do hope that it catches on a national level, because it seems like it's
Chris,
really missing.
I appreciate you as a mentor and as a friend, and I really appreciate the opportunity to talk to you and your audience. Thank you.
All right, Mark, you're very welcome. It's I want to say something cute, but it's a lot more fun when you like the person you get to spend time with. So it's mutual for us.